Russia has no plan B. Their few-day war became a 3-year war of attrition against a Ukrainian army committed to defending its country. So is the end near for Russia? Experts watching the war in Ukraine think so and are predicting that Russia will not only be forced to withdraw from the war before 2026, but that the whole country could go down. It might be one of the most spectacular reversals of fortune in history. Here's why experts are predicting Russia's imminent downfall. This protracted battle has possibly caught Russian authorities flat-footed. Many military experts say Putin and Russia have failed to make difficult but necessary decisions to create the systems necessary for sustaining a protracted war. According to Michael Clark, former director of the Royal United Services Institute and current professor of defense studies at King's College, this lack of foresight and preparedness is not only impacting Russia's ability to conduct the war, but also causing major economic issues for the country. This could lead to not only Russia being forced to withdraw from Ukraine on unfavorable terms, but also to the entire collapse of Russia as a global superpower before 2026. Throughout the war, Russia has employed high-casualty tactics, initially deeming them a worthwhile sacrifice in return for the quick conclusion of the war. They sent a large number of soldiers in frontal assaults with minimal support, effectively a meat grinder approach. This has resulted in an average loss of 1,523 Russian soldiers per day killed or injured, at least as of 2024. Since Ukraine has shown both its determination and ability to protect its territory, with the support of the United States and European allies, this is proving to be a fatal tactic in a protracted war. And it's not just soldiers that Russia has been losing at an alarming rate. According to Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief General Alexander Syrsky, Russia has lost almost 10,000 tanks since the start of the invasion, with Ukrainian forces reportedly destroying or damaging 3,689 tanks, 8,956 infantry fighting vehicles, 13,050 artillery systems, and 407 air defense systems in 2024 alone. Russia's defense industry can't seem to produce new armored vehicles and artillery systems at the same rate as they're being lost. For example, Russia is reportedly able to produce about 200 infantry fighting vehicles each year, which is a small fraction of what they may have lost in 2024 alone. Russia reportedly only has 2 factories that produce artillery gun barrels, limiting production to around 50 per year, with no easy ways to upscale production to counter losses. Russia also reportedly only has 1 factory producing new tanks, with production estimates varying from 20 per month to fewer than 100 per year. As a result, Russia is replacing tanks with pre-1985 tanks from storage, which don't have the sophistication to perform against modern artillery systems and drones. Moreover, while Russia has been dealing with a shortfall in production of new equipment by tapping Soviet-era stocks, their resource is finite and is believed to be approaching a point of diminishing availability. Some analysts predict that Russia will run out of its Soviet-era stockpiles by the end of 2025 or 2026. This predicament seems to be manifesting in Russia using fewer armored vehicles in their offensives. Observers believe that Russia started cutting back on these vehicles in Donetsk in November 2024, a region where Russia had previously relied heavily on armored vehicle assaults to make advances. Russia is also unable to produce sufficient shells to meet operational needs, even though it intensified production at the start of the war. They are estimated to be producing 250,000 artillery shells per month, but are also estimated to be firing 10,000 rounds per day. This has severely reduced the 5-to-1 munitions advantage Russia had over Ukraine in the first year of the war, which is now down to approximately 1.5-to-1. This has also resulted in Russia relying more heavily on contributions from its allies, with up to 60% of the shells fired in December 2024 reportedly coming from North Korea. Russia also relies on Iran, especially for Shahid drones, but it's unclear whether Iran will be willing or able to increase production to supply Russia. In January 2025 alone, Iranian officials noted that the alliance between Russia and Iran is not a military alliance, suggesting that Iran is unwilling to become too heavily involved in Russia's war. Similarly, while China has large stocks of military equipment, they have so far been unwilling to provide Russia with this kind of direct support, no doubt to avoid triggering economic sanctions. Russia's high casualty tactics have also significantly affected their available manpower. This, in combination with the general bad treatment of military personnel, is one of the reasons for the imminent collapse of the viability of the war in Ukraine. In addition to decimating the Russian army, with a reported total of 972,600 troops lost since the start of the full-scale invasion in February 2022, according to Ukraine, it's also reduced the soldiers' willingness to fight and public confidence in military operations. While Ukraine's casualty estimates may be overblown, Russia is certainly feeling the pinch. In July 2024, Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin announced a one-time payment of 1.9 million rubles, approximately $20,793 in US dollars, as a signing bonus for soldiers. However, observers note that the financial incentives already dwarf the average Russian salary, suggesting that people motivated to volunteer for monetary reasons have probably already done so, and these kinds of incentives are likely to have a limited impact. In response, the government is looking to expand the pool of potential recruits by, for example, removing some of the minor illnesses that have previously disqualified people from the military. The fact that Russia has used troops shipped in from North Korea also points to the dire state of recruitment. Putin has publicly suggested that Russia can sustain a slow military victory based on creeping advances that squeeze Ukrainian forces out of territories that should be under Russian control. Among other things, he stated that this meant that Russia did not need to conduct another partial involuntary reserve call-up, similar to what happened in September 2022, because Russia is not trying to win its military objectives quickly. This argument rests on the assumption that Russia can outlast and overcome Western military support for Ukraine, no matter how incremental it's been and continues to be. Considering the current state of the Russian military, this assumption is now highly questionable. While Russia's military engine is slowly losing resources, morale and support for the war are also diminishing as Ukraine has become increasingly successful at bringing the war to Russia, eroding the idea that this is an overseas war and that Russia itself is invincible. Ukraine has become increasingly successful in launching drone attacks against Russian targets, and new long-range drones with ranges of up to 1,800 miles put many Russian targets, including Moscow itself, within reach. Reportedly, on one day in May 2025, 105 Ukrainian drones were detected and destroyed in Russian territory, including over Moscow. There was talk of cancelling the May 9th World War II victory parade in response, but it went ahead as usual. However, there were airport closures and other disruptions to life in the center of Russia as a precaution. There have been successful Ukrainian drone attacks on oil refineries, military bases, and cities like Belgorod. Ukraine successfully hit Belgorod with a barrage of missiles on December 30, 2023, reportedly killing 25 people, including 5 children, and injuring over 100. For many Russians, this was seen as a bloody escalation of the conflict. Since then, Ukraine has targeted a huge fuel export terminal on the Baltic Sea southwest of St. Petersburg, forcing the energy company Novatek to suspend operations for several days. They ignited a fire at one of Russia's largest oil refineries at the Black Sea port of Tuapse and at another big refinery in the Volga River city of Yaroslavl. Finally, Ukraine has hit arms producers and military facilities in the Bryansk, Smolensk, and Tula regions. These increasingly frequent and successful Ukrainian attacks are taking the war to Russia, which remained largely untouched for the first 2 years of the battle. It is increasingly the visibility of the war in Russia that is leading to pushback against the Kremlin. Reports suggest that thousands in Russia have even signed petitions supporting the unlikely presidential bid of liberal politician Boris Nadezhdin, who has made ending the war his singular campaign issue. Russian perception of the war has also been impacted by Ukraine advancing into and occupying part of the Kursk Oblast, suggesting for the first time that Russia could have been at risk of losing territory during this conflict. The Kursk Oblast, or region, is located on the southwestern border of Russia in what is known as a Black Earth territory due to its highly fertile soil. It seems that Russia did not seriously consider incursions into its own territory and did not significantly fortify this border. In August 2024, Ukrainian forces crossed the border into Kursk, resulting in a small part of the region coming under Ukrainian occupation, giving the Russians a taste of their own medicine. Ukraine occupied 482 square miles of the Russian territory, containing 92 settlements. Moreover, with just a division's worth of troops, the occupying force had been able to undermine Russia's offensive strategies elsewhere, as Russia has had to use up to 78,000 troops, including some of the aforementioned North Koreans, in attempts to expel the approximately 11,000 Ukrainian troops from the region. In March 2025, with significant resources, the Russians were able to force Ukrainian troops to retreat from key areas of Kursk by using indiscriminate, around-the-clock drone strikes to target Ukrainian troops. One soldier suggested that they saw 2 to 3 drones every minute on the main logistical routes. In an attempt to guarantee success, Russians used advanced drones with fiber optic wires, which can't be jammed with electronic countermeasures. The war effort has also struck Russia's economy, which is suffering from increased and unsustainable war spending, growing inflation, significant labor shortages, and reductions in Russia's sovereign wealth fund. Russia has been hit hard by Western sanctions since the start of the war, including being removed from SWIFT, the international financial messaging system. Thousands of companies have terminated or suspended business operations in Russia, and hundreds of wealthy Russians have had their assets frozen or seized. Several countries have also reduced their consumption of Russian gas. The effects of these sanctions are only now being felt by the Russian economy, which expanded in 2023 and 2024 due to increased defense spending. At the end of 2024, the ruble had lost more than half its value against the US dollar and the euro, and Russian oil dropped to $64.40 per barrel. Bloomberg reported in January 2025 that the liquidity of Russia's sovereign wealth fund, which is the cash and investments that Moscow can easily access, decreased by 24% in 2024 to 3.8 trillion rubles, or around $47.1 billion. Alongside this, Russia's fiscal deficit increased tenfold between January 2024 and January 2025 to 1.7 trillion rubles, or $18.6 billion. Despite this, Russia has reportedly allocated 17 trillion rubles, $177 billion, of its planned 2025 budget to defense and security, which is 41% of its entire budget. Based on this forecast, some economists predict that Russia's liquid reserves will be drained by the fall of 2025. To compensate, Russia has been trying to reduce spending on benefits to military personnel, which is further impacting the ability to recruit. These challenges are compounded by rising inflation, largely caused by the one-off payments given to soldiers to join the war and higher wages offered to attract workers to Russia's defense industrial base to ramp up artillery production. Despite this, factories are still reportedly operating at only 80%. Competition and higher wages in the defense sector are also pushing wages higher in other areas. Such high wages reflect labor shortages in both military and civil sectors, which are limiting economic growth. Unemployment has reportedly dropped from a rate of 6.8% in mid-2023 to just 2.3% at the end of 2024. While the Kremlin is highlighting Russia's record low unemployment, it is severely limiting productivity. Labor market and wage issues mean that many Russians are now flush with cash to spend, which is pushing up prices. Butter prices were apparently up 30%, and potato prices were up more than 50% in 2024. Russia is experiencing inflation as high as 20%, though officials in the Kremlin have only acknowledged rates as high as 9.9% in an attempt to portray a stronger economic position to the world. High inflation has, in turn, led the Russian central bank to raise interest rates to 21% in October 2024, the highest rate since 2003. While this aims to curb inflation, it has meant that Russian banks approved only 5% of all consumer loans in January 2025, a record low. While Putin has claimed publicly that the Russian economy is stable and reliable, and that it can stand confidently on its own 2 feet, economists are concerned that if Russia continues to increase spending on the war and diminish its sovereign wealth fund, it will no longer have the economic strength to weather future economic crises, wherever they may come from. Meanwhile, war watchers suggest that Ukraine, with Western aid, can accelerate how soon Putin's Russia feels the strain that the war is placing on the country's military and economy, perhaps forcing Putin to end the war sooner than he would like. While Russia is struggling to maintain its military, Western support for Ukraine could be scaled quickly, which could increase the rate of Russian losses, making the war untenable. If Putin were then forced to make another involuntary reservist call-up, he would undermine the economy and risk extreme domestic unrest. Alternatively, Putin could transition Russia into full war mode, which would require the Kremlin to reframe 3 years of narratives about the war. The other possibility for Putin is to come to the negotiating table to avoid either of these unpopular moves. It might be in his best interest to do this in 2025, while he can still claim that Russia can outlast Ukraine on the battlefield, rather than wait until 2026, by which time Russia's dire economic position will be impossible to hide. However, coming to the negotiation table in such a weakened position is not in alignment with Putin's intentions when starting the war. If he doesn't win the war, it will damage Russia's position as a global superpower. The head of Ukraine's military intelligence, Kirill Budanov, has noted how much pressure this puts on Russia, because it would relegate it to a regional power behind the United States and China as global powers, and this does not suit Russian ambitions. When Putin started the full-scale war in 2022, it was not just about claiming Ukrainian territory. It viewed victory over Ukraine as the first step in undoing the post-Cold War order, which has deprived Russia of its sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. Ukraine is a battlefield between Russia and NATO, which for Russia represents the collective West. Putin is convinced that victory in Ukraine would start the process of dismantling the international order upheld by NATO. After winning the war, his plan was to turn Ukraine into a Slavic Union state alongside Belarus and possibly northern Kazakhstan. This would be the first step in restoring lands that, in Putin's view, rightfully belonged to Russia and were severed from it by Western machinations in 1991. Winning in Ukraine would also be an opportunity for Putin to negotiate the rollback of NATO out of Russia's sphere of influence, reinvigorating Russia so that it can retake its position as a global superpower alongside the United States and China. Joining with China could then lead to a world in which the United States is no longer dominant. This means that there is the possibility that Russia might have a dramatically different response to the mounting pressure other than capitulation. Putin has already brandished nuclear weapons as a threat and modified Russia's nuclear doctrine to lower the threshold needed to initiate a nuclear strike. However, as recently as May 2025, Putin stated that there has been no need for the use of nuclear weapons in the conflict and that he hopes it does not arise. One of the only glimmers of hope for Russia to resolve the war in a way that allows it to save face is the return of Donald Trump to office as President of the United States. Trump has expressed his commitment to finding a peaceful solution to the conflict sooner rather than later, and has been working on agreeing to a one-month total ceasefire since February 2025. While Russia is currently resisting the ceasefire and is demanding that Ukraine cede territory and not join NATO, those demands could change as Trump offers an opportunity for Putin to disentangle himself from the war while saving face, something that would probably not be possible under another president. However, Trump's foreign policy moves can be unpredictable and are constantly evolving, so the outcome of negotiations could be very different. What do you think? Is Russia's military activity in Ukraine no longer sustainable, and are they likely to be forced to pull out of Ukraine in 2025 due to a lack of artillery and manpower to continue the war? Do current economic conditions in Russia, created by the war, pose a fundamental threat to the Russian state itself, potentially severely undermining the quality of life of its citizens and its potential to be a world or even regional power? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching.